just a little reflective quote on really what Compassion St. Augustine is. It's who we are, it's the work that you've done. Hope is like a path in the countryside. Originally, there was nothing. But as people walk this way again and again, the path appears. That's a solid quote. I appreciate Warren for sharing that with us tonight. And then we'll move into our Charter of Compassion video.
The principle of compassion lies at the heart of all religious, ethical, and spiritual traditions.
Calling us always to treat all others as we wish to be treated ourselves.
Compassion impels us to work tirelessly to alleviate the suffering of our fellow creatures.
To dethrone ourselves from the center of our world and put another there.
To honor the inviolable sanctity of every single human being.
Treating everybody without exception.
With absolute justice, equity, and respect.
It is also necessary in both public and private life
To refrain consistently and empathically from inflicting pain.
To act or speak violently out of spite, or chauvinism, or self-interest.
To impoverish, exploit, or deny basic rights to anybody.
And to incite hatred by denigrating others, even our enemies.
Is a denial of our common humanity.
We acknowledge that we have failed to live compassionately.
and that some have even increased the sum of human misery in the name of religion.
We therefore call upon all men and women to restore compassion,
To the center of morality and religion.
to return to the ancient principle
That any interpretation of scripture
that breeds violence, hatred,
or disdain
is illegitimate.
To ensure that youth are given accurate and respectful information.
Other traditions, religions, and cultures to encourage a positive appreciation of cultural and religious diversity.
To cultivate
An informed empathy with the suffering of all human beings,
even those
regarded as enemies.
We urgently need to make compassion a clear, luminous, and dynamic force in our polarized world.
Rooted in principled determination to transcend selfishness.
Compassion can break down political, dogmatic, ideological, and religious boundaries.
Born of our deep interdependence, compassion is essential for human relationships and to a fulfilled humanity.
It is the path to enlightenment and indispensable in the creation of a just economy and a peaceful global community.
Good evening, everybody. I came to St. Augustine about 9.5 years ago with Pam, and I came back home because I grew up in Mandarin, came here all the time when I was growing up, and I love the history of this place. For the longest time, I thought of the history of St. Augustine as something that was other than me, as something that happened 400 years ago. 450 years ago, or 2,000 years ago, in the people that were here originally. And what I've come to realize is that I am part of the continuum of history. And I have been watching that history unfold before my eyes through the work of Compassion St. Augustine. So I'd like to set it in context with a illustration of part of our history, where compassion really was expressed, where you could see it happening. In this part of my life, I'm an historical illustrator, and so with this story of Fort Mosaic, I wanted to capture the energy moment, that moment when people who were trying to escape from chattel slavery in the Carolinas and Georgia had been hearing about Freedom Town. They've been hearing about a place they could be free if they could make it down here to Spanish Florida. This was in the 1680s all the way through the middle and later 1700s. And so this is the moment when people, helped by the indigenous people of that coast, the Yamasee, and you see them, one of the Yamasee persons there, accompanied by them, guided by them to make it all the way down here. They reached Fort Mosaic, and this is the welcome that they received. And you could see the ecstatic, the euphoria, that we made it. We made it to freedom, and they did whatever it took in order to be free. I set this as a stage. I thought that this might fit very well for a couple of the stories that we're going to be telling tonight, right after this. And the focus of tonight is really listening to stories from our current history of when we actually experienced compassionate, transforming action happening before our eyes in the initiatives of Compassion at St. Augustine over the first 10 years of its life. And that's what we're celebrating, and that's what we're looking at tonight. So, Alexis?
Thank you. And I neglected to introduce myself. I'm Alexius Ferguson. I am a board member of Compassion at St. Augustine. And one of my first, I was a social worker at Webster School through Children's Home Society in my previous role. And one of the first projects that I got to do was really one of my biggest legacy projects. And it was the Let Freedom Ring Chimes project in collaboration with Compassion at St. Augustine. So our students designed tiles. They designed some of those same tiles that are still down there in Hayling Park. And kids, I mean, these are 3rd, 4th, 5th graders, right alongside the DJJ students as well. And then to see it erected into an actual public park, to have the big ribbon cutting for our students, Title I kids at Webster, they didn't experience things like that very often. And I still look back at the news clippings, and as I said, that was one of my first legacy projects. It was in my first year in that position. And really things like that don't happen at Webster, at Title I schools. And we were able to make it happen. Karen was a person that didn't accept no. She found a way to work around things. The group as a whole is very grassroots. So I really appreciate that, and that was one of my first examples of seeing compassion in action through the Webster School. Nancy.
Hi, I'm Nancy O'Byrne, and I was involved with the Compassion in Action initiative of Compassion at St. Augustine, and that was the Criminal Justice and Prison Reform Initiative. I was involved with it for about 6 or 7 years, and how I came about joining is I had trained as an Alternative to Violence project facilitator a few years prior to joining Compassion at St. Augustine, and I offered to bring that program to the Juvenile Detention Center, which we have in St. Augustine here called St. John's Youth Academy. Now the youth version of AVP is called HIP, Help Increase the Peace program. And it involves 3 weekends. These boys have to go through basic, advanced, and then training for facilitators over about a 3-month period. This experiential program actually emphasizes affirmation, communication, cooperation, and getting in touch with their inner transforming power. Orlando Freeman was the new director at the St. John's Youth Academy. When we approached him, Compassion at St. Augustine asked if we could bring in some programs, interactive programs from the community to his boys there at the detention center. And he actually welcomed us. He was enthusiastic. I mean, most directors of juvenile detention centers don't want the community coming in at all. So we were thrilled. Compassion St. Augustine ended up bringing about 30 different programs to the center, juvenile detention center. Piano lessons, photography lessons, meditation and mindfulness sessions, art and mural painting, yoga, drama and drumming classes. We even brought together for them a social etiquette lessons. So it ran the gamut. So we started our basic HIP workshop with one of the pods there, had 12 boys, ages 13 to 17. And my team of facilitators, I don't know if the picture is up yet, but anyway, I had asked a gentleman from Tampa who had been in prison and actually learned the AVP program in prison. I also invited Kathy Hirsch from down in Miami. She was doing these workshops in the girls' juvenile detention center down there. We thought we would be getting one of the more advanced pods there at the Juvenile Detention Center with some of the eagles. These were the cream of the crop there. Well, when we showed up, we ended up getting the most volatile pod that they had at the detention center. I guess because Orlando wanted to see if this program was really going to work. So fast forward 3 months after that, that pod became known as the Peace Pod. So we proved ourselves to Orlando and then spent the next 3 years doing these workshops with the other pods. But I want to tell you about one of the boys that stood out in this first workshop that we did. His name was Khalil Gibson. And we noticed him because often the other boys would look up to him. He was a natural leader, and they kind of would follow his lead during the sessions. And if he was willing to stick his neck out and play along with some of the role playing or do a silly game, then they'd join in too. He went all the way through and got his youth facilitator certificate, and that's the picture. There he is. That's the picture of Khalil Gibson getting his youth facilitator certificate. He was very proud of that. And he really hoped to run these sessions after he graduated out of the detention center. Well, he did get out. He was 18 years old. He got a job through the program that Operation New Hope has for former offenders in Jacksonville. And of course, since then, we've brought Compassion St. Augustine was instrumental in bringing Operation New Hope here to St. Augustine. Gibson started taking college courses and was on the road to getting a job, to getting his life in order. And his mom was a huge support to him. When he graduated from the Operation New Hope program, he decided he was going to move in with a couple of other guys into an apartment and keep going to school and working. But unfortunately, he met with an accident. He decided to jump out of a car at a traffic light. It was stopped, but he missed the curb, and he ended up falling on his head and unfortunately passed away in the hospital. My husband and I went to his funeral, and there were so many young boys there who stood up and said, you know, Orlando changed my life. He helped me to get on a better path. See, Khalil Gibson was a young man beyond his years because he looked to help others outside of himself, and he helped them to be their best. He, Gibson, embodied compassion for me. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Nancy. And I really like that story because if it works for the least of these or the most difficult students, it's going to work for all students. Thank you. All right, so we're going to move to the Gibson certificate. Is that correct, Warren?
No.
After that.
That is that picture. So the next is the
YouTube.
The video. Yes.
I made a mistake that morning in February of taking a look at Facebook to see what was going on. And on Facebook, and this was in 2011, there was something about this thing called the Charter for Compassion. And I couldn't do anything for the rest of the day. The concept of what the charter put out there at that time, Seattle had become the first compassionate city, and there were just 2 others. And as I thought about it, began to look at the idea of what would happen in St. Augustine if it was to become a compassionate city.
If you think about it, when Pedro Menendez arrived with 800 people 450 years ago, this coming September, he had such a diversity of backgrounds and cultures with him. All of a sudden, tolerance becomes a big deal. How do you
are stories that are caught in a one-panel image to tell the stories of this particular area. And most of these stories here deal with the topic of compassion, where there was compassion in our history here at St. Augustine.
It's a small city. It's easy to get to know one another. It's easy to be included in things. And we made an effort to do that.
To bring people together, be able to offer something that wasn't here. And so that was the first level of what we were doing, is going around, contacting people in other nonprofits, other services that were being provided, and inviting them to be partners with us.
I and my fellow commissioners voted unanimously to move forward as a compassionate city. And in doing so, we engaged also our sister city in Abilene, because when you say Pedro Menendez, our founder's name, you always say Pedro Menendez de Avilés, from Abilene, Spain. So when we connected Abilene, Spain, and St. Augustine, we became the first international sister city compassionate cities.
The tapestry, the cultural threads of First America, first of all, celebrates the multicultural founding of America. It happened here in 1565. They exchanged ideas, foods, dance, rituals, words, languages, everything you could imagine. It was the very genesis of the American culture that we know today, that characterizes not only St. Augustine's culturally diverse community, but also characterizes us as a nation.
When you make your lexicon a positive lexicon, then you become a positive person. So when you talk about compassion and its relevance and what it means and what we do in our daily life that illustrate a commitment to being compassionate, then you become compassionate.
For me personally, it's a matter of I'm a hugger by definition, so it's bringing a more personal listening to everything. We have public comments. We now actually have something close to a dialogue. The commission has sometimes very lively dialogues, but it's much more recognizing that the fabric of a city is its people, and if you listen and if you respond, if you can listen clearly and respond, that to me, I think, is my definition of how we are if we are compassionate.
We all like the idea in the 450th anniversary of St. Augustine that a public art project here could be centered around history, culture, multicultural opportunities, and the principles of compassion.
I think one of the things we've tried to really be clear about is that the art project is a project primarily that deals with relational values: freedom, democracy, human rights, compassion.
What would make a great canvas? And I thought about the obelisk in the square.
And so this is a reproduction of the obelisk that is down in the plaza here. It is a reproduction of the oldest monument in Florida, made to the Constitution, but not to the U.S. Constitution, but to the Spanish Constitution of 1812. And the pillars of the Spanish Constitution of 1812 were freedom, democracy, human rights, and compassion.
So we put out a call to artists and invited those interested to respond. And so the artists that are involved, they want to be involved. They are very interested in communicating those core values on behalf of Compassionate St. Augustine for the city of St. Augustine. Art is a fantastic thing, and it does give you a lens into the time of when it was created.
You know, I very much believe in the arts and having a power and enable expression, and felt that compassion was even on a deeper, just a more basic level that every single person could relate to.
We got into this and we started thinking, well, how can we involve children? And out of that came the idea that we could make half-size obelisks and
put them into the school system and have a curriculum around compassion and art in the school system going on at the same time when the adult version is in play.
So it really made a lot of sense to do that. And when we talked to the teachers, went out and I sent the ideas out to the teachers and sent them a picture of the black obelisk and basically an outline of what it was about. I said, sure, let's try that sometime in the project.
What we hope that this project does is provide students the long-term memories and the long-term instruction on how to not only be compassionate, but also how to be an engaged member of the community. To realize that each community has a history, and each of the students plays a role in that history from a very early age all the way through adulthood.
Well, I was really lucky to be in Seattle on April 2010 when Karen Armstrong visited and declared Seattle the first city to sign her Charter of Compassion. Human history is one of conflict but also peacetime. And as American Muslims after 9/11 particularly, we felt more than ever that discussion, education, compassion need to rule the day, not war, not conflict. I mean, that doesn't win anybody anything.
Every community that has a soup kitchen or a food bank or a way of helping people with their rent and electrical bill has a compassionate component to it. But to take that and elevate it and make it an overarching consideration that becomes part of your decision-making process, I think it's just a good way to go. And you do it in a way that you're not taking a religious position or you're not taking a political position. You're taking a human position that everyone should be able to stand behind 100%. And if you don't, then I'll pray for you.
There's something calling, there's a yearning, there's a desire to be more involved in making this a better place, a place where people can agree to disagree, where people talk about things with civility, and where people want to come together for the greater good.
All right, what a great video. And a lot of great faces and voices in there speaking on compassion. So this is where you are going to take part of this discussion. You're going to collaborate with us. You're going to speak out loud. We have a couple mics that we can pass around the room so that you can be a part of this discussion. All right, so if you want to close your eyes, you can, but just focus in for a second, and I'm going to read a quick little headline, and I want you to respond to it. So dream for a minute. 5 years from now, you're reading a headline, and you say to yourself, wow, compassion really is growing in St. Augustine and St. Johns County. What is the headline? So I want you to answer that question. So what is the headline? What headline are you reading that tells you that compassion is growing in St. Johns County and St. Augustine? Any volunteers? Or take a minute. Yes.
Here, Blair, there's a little mic here, so we can probably hear you.
They've opened up a very large homeless shelter with apartments. Yeah, that's the headline.
Hey, you guys, I'm a minister, so I like the response. So can we just give a little snap when somebody says something like that resonates with me? Amen. Amen. All right. Any other volunteers? Yes.
Exception from reflection.
Exception from reflection. Is that right? I like it.
What does that mean? What's exception from reflection mean? Explain a little bit more.
From taking a period of time to thank you. From taking a period of time to look inward mentally, and then because of that, being able, radical acceptance, it's a
second chances pay off, and particularly if everyone looks at having a second chance.
Anyone else?
Unconditional love.
Before getting into the work that I do, I started a movement called Redemption. And so redeeming the time would be one for me. If I saw people actually living like they were redeeming the time, that would be good for me. Warren?
The headline would be 25 more businesses signed on to hire persons coming out of Operation New Hope.
We'll give a little bit more on Operation New Hope for anybody that doesn't know about it. Anyone else? Any other volunteers? Any headlines come to mind? Yes.
That the leadership of St. Augustine and the people who run the city look like the people who live in the city.
Here's another one. St. Johns County, growing middle class. Anyone else? Yes.
Intentional awareness of wasted resources and how that could foster helping the homeless community around this area. I think if we're more aware of food waste and general resource waste, there could be a reform in that.
Yeah, I had a neighbor one time, and I'm sorry to give a sidebar. He was a visitor to town, or new to town, and he said that we had enough restaurants in this town for him to eat at a different place just about every night. And obviously food waste happens. And there's this, cloud of I might get sued or other things, but we could definitely feed our city multiple times over. Anyone else? Yes.
Massive investment in West St. Augustine for people not profit.
Yeah, I like that. Can you say that one in the mic? Because I don't know if everybody heard me, but I'm a West Augustine native, so it's hard.
I said massive investment in West St. Augustine for people not profit.
Yeah, I like that. Yes, Arthur.
So mine would be a community well fed.
That's not a headline. Yes.
Affordable housing for young people and everyone.
Anyone else before we move to the next agenda item?
One more.
Two more. Kenny, Ms. Kenny.
We have overcome.
We have.
We have overcome.
Nancy, did you have one?
I did. A new interfaith, intergenerational, and interracial center has opened in St. Augustine.
All right.
All right, so I have one more illustration and then a couple more stories of compassion. So I'll invite Mr. Jim up to share your story and I'll pull the illustration up. If it's another one, I can pull it up real quick. It said, what happens when we overcome? Is that what the?
Yeah.